Hello and welcome to the American Cinema Foundation Movie Podcast. I am your host, Titus, and today in our Middlebrow series, I am joined by two new interlocutors. My friend Peter Robinson, whom I am now looking at, gazing upon with affection and nostalgia since we haven't seen each other in years since this plague started, and John Yu, whom I have never seen before, but heard and seen on Ricochet podcasts and such things, and on YouTube, because he is a lawyer and a celebrity among lawyers.
A celebrity, yes.
A celebrity lawyer.
I am a celebrity lawyer.
Which is even a rank lower, if I think.
Admittedly, celebrity, there's always something suspicious about that, but there's also
I've always wanted to be I want to be the Lincoln lawyer, like in the movies.
Johnny Cochran. Johnny Cochran is what you're turning out to be, John.
No, this is if you're a fan of different movies and shows, there's the detective show that's on Amazon Prime called Bosch. Harry Bosch,
yes,
which is a great, and I've read all those books. And then there's a side detour. Harry Bosch's brother is the Lincoln lawyer in the movie. There's a whole line of Harry Bosch related lawyer books.
That's right.
And they're great. And make it even better. One of my very close friends, I think, was the model for this lawyer. And he told me about how he was consulted by the movie producers about how to make the movie, The Lincoln Lawyer. And it gets even worse. It's like an episode out of Seinfeld. Because I said, well, did you get to meet with Matthew McConaughey? He said, no. He said, but I did get to talk to Marissa Tomei for a whole hour. And I was like, Marissa Tomei. It's like George Costanza in Seinfeld when he gets to meet Marissa Tomei. See, I know a lot about pop culture. And if you remember this particular Seinfeld episode, it's one of the best episodes. Marissa Tomei meets George Costanza, and she says, George, how are you not taken? How is someone so bald and fat and quirky not taken already? Of course, George is engaged, and so he pretends he's not. And then he says, well, there's this engagement thing, but it's not serious. And then Marissa Tomei belts him.
I will have you know that I know Eddie Hayes, lawyer in Manhattan, who was the model for the lawyer in Bonfire of the Vanities.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yes. Counselor Eddie Hayes, as Tom Wolfe always referred to him. He does not appear under his real name, but I have it from Tom Wolfe and Ed Hayes himself that he was the model for the lawyer in Bonfire of the Vanities. Titus, you need to take back control of your own podcast. So John and I will go. By the way, speaking of lawyers, there's a tremendously artful segue for you. I saw Anatomy of a Murder not long ago. Jimmy Stewart plays it's Jimmy Stewart?
Yeah.
Is it Jimmy Stewart and George C. Scott? Who plays the prosecutor? Jimmy Stewart plays the defending attorney.
Was it Lee J. Cobb?
Lee J.
Or George C. Scott?
We should be able to look this up in 2 seconds. But the striking thing, the judge, I thought, who plays the judge? The judge is just a wonderful character actor, kind of bumbly and yet incisive when he needs to be. He lets the lawyers go, and then he takes control of the courtroom. And the judge was played by Joseph Welch, the lawyer who nailed Joseph McCarthy in the Army McCarthy hearings.
Wow.
As far as I know, it's the only role he ever played. He played it just beautifully. And within 6 months after they closed filming, he was dead of a heart attack.
Wow.
Yeah,
I was about to say, I'm really waiting now for my appearance as an extra, but not if it means you only have 6 months to live.
So apparently celebrity lawyers and cinema go much further than we thought. This should be an entire podcast. Let's just do it next month, however.
No. We have courses in law schools called Law in Cinema, where we just talk.
Are you serious?
Yes, we talk about the depiction of lawyers and judges, because there's so many movies about the law. And so we wonder, like, do more normal people, civilians, believe about the law what they see in TV and movies, not from how it actually operates? Like, how do you know what the Miranda warning is? It's not because you looked it up. It's because you hear it on every TV show about police officers.
Right.
So we have whole courses about, like, depiction of the law in movies. Yes.
I just looked it up. The prosecutor was George C. Scott, by the way.
Yeah, you're right.
In Anatomy of a Murder, 1959, a 1959 picture.
That's Otto Preminger. It was.
That's exactly
his
right.
kind of movie. It's a good movie. I have to say, I look at it and I say it's liberal, but it is a good movie.
Jimmy Stewart was such a staunch defender and close friend of Ronald Reagan that he inoculates the whole movie for me. If Jimmy Stewart's there, I think to myself, this movie's safe and I can relax and I don't think in ideological terms at all, which that's a very difficult toggle to reach in my mind. It's almost always on, but Jimmy Stewart toggles it off.
Oh, so Jimmy Stewart, right? He put his movie career on hold and went served on the bombers in World War II. I mean, that's
Yes,
amazing.
he did.
That's right.
Right? Yeah.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
And
And he
he
lost
was
one
a
of his.
Republican.
He lost one of his stepsons. His wife had been married before. He was only married once, but his wife had been married previously, and he lost one of his stepsons in Vietnam.
I did not know
Wow,
that.
I didn't know that.
And never turned against the Vietnam War. He was a really remarkable man. I met him once. I was in the White House. I said, Mr. Stewart, I wrote the remarks the president is about to deliver. And here's what Jimmy Stewart said to me. Oh, and then his wife came and took him by the elbow and led him away.
He didn't have some witty remark about how the writers are more important than the actors or something?
No, he was pretty old man at that stage. He was trying to figure out where he was supposed to go. Anyway, that was my life with Jimmy Stewart. Titus, take control.
All right. I'm fascinated by this idea of lawyers and cinema and what it means to have celebrities and what it means to have the law give you these images that indeed you would never know from real life. You just see it in the shows and the movies.
Hopefully you've never had the Miranda warnings read to you.
Not to me.
Hey, so
I'm sure Peter has many times, but yes, the Miranda warnings you only know from Law and Order, really. Law and
John,
Order.
do you find yourself, when you read these Michael Connelly Bosch novels, do you find yourself critiquing it as a lawyer?
Course.
Now he's got this wrong, or
Yeah,
they got that wrong. Or so who's good? From the lawyer's point of view,
Oh no,
who has
I
the
actually
procedure
think these
down?
I actually think these Michael Connelly books are very good. He basically, if I remember correctly, Michael Connelly used to be a crime reporter for the LA Times. So he's getting a lot of this from the police officers he knew and covering the crime. So it's very, I mean, the plot twists and everything are a little, can be silly, but I find like in terms of the procedural stuff, I think it's fairly true to life. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Because I love Bosch. I don't love it enough to read it, but I love it enough to watch the show.
Oh no, the books are much better than the TV show.
Are they really?
Much better. Oh yeah. Books are much better. So each of the episodes on the Amazon Prime show are often 3 of the novels scrunched together. So they've taken a lot out of the books. And then the other thing, and this is also related to the Master and Commander stuff, is there's a lot about the food in LA. My kind of food, not Bouchon or Wolfgang Puck. It's all about cheap street food. So whenever I'm reading the books, I'm writing this stuff down about places to go because they're all real places. And like where to get like cheap, good burritos and French dip sandwiches and Japanese curry. Like because he was a crime beat reporter.
I didn't know. I should have known that about him. I did not know that about him.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so that's why the grit in those books is real.
Yes.
The feel of the streets is real. He comes
by
that
the books
honestly.
are even grittier.
So Master and Commander, as I rewatched it last night for the first time since it came out in 2003.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, I've seen it like 10 times.
Oh, have you? Okay, so
it's on TV all the time. It's on cable all the time. Yeah, I always.
Is it really?
See it on cable.
So Patrick O'Brien wrote 20 novels from 1969 to 1999. Master and Commander, the movie, takes episodes from at least 2 or 3. Isn't that right?
Yeah, there's elements from first one, Master and Commander, from I think it was HMS Surprise, the 3rd one, and from Far Side of the World, which is the 10th one, but they're all modified into a script. The director, Peter Weir, he's wonderful, and he put up this entire thing that comes up to one full story and a kind of account of Britain versus France and the Napoleonic Wars. But also the characters are the characters from the novels, and the care of all things nautical is also from the novel. So for all the liberties taken, they fit fairly well in the series. I think even fans liked the fact that it's close enough to getting a 21st Aubrey-Maturin story in the movie. So that's why it was such a success. And it's also more a movie. It's more cinema and less of a novel. You're not going to have a lot of interior monologue, and you're not going to have all that much nautical jargon. That's not how cinema works. But on the other hand, you do get more of a sense of the mission, the drive, the coming together, the drama, what it means for these people to pull together or to fail, and how catastrophic it could be, of course.
It struck me as a flawless movie, almost flawless entertainment in the following sense. From the first frame, it grabs you, and it doesn't let you go until the very end. There's nothing slack in the movie. There's no downtime. There's no moment I felt, and my wife felt, she watched it with me last night, she was seeing it for the first time, that there wasn't a moment when you weren't totally engrossed. And it's quite a long picture. I don't remember, I didn't check the time, but it's quite a long picture. The photography is gorgeous. And I was trying to think, in 2003, how did they do some of those shots? Drones hadn't been invented yet, I don't think. So they must have been using those gyroscopic cameras on helicopters, those aerial shots, which are very expensive to do. The whole thing was just beautiful. There's a kind of lush sense of gorgeousness about it that I just loved. I noticed only about 2 or 3 anachronisms in the dialogue. At one point, the sailor who has his head trepanned, and he says something that the other sailors think is ridiculous. And a sailor sitting next to him says, "Where did that come from?" Well, where did that come from is an early 20th, not an early 19th century construction. And then there's a bit, the first time he appears, the young midshipman Blakeney is referred to as Lord Blakeney. And then about halfway through the movie, he turns into Mr. Blakeney and never is Lord Blakeney again. So there's one little glitch in continuity, but those are minute flaws in a staggering thing. So I also kept thinking, what a tragedy that it was viewed at the time, not as a flop, but as much too minor a success to justify sequels. So I looked this up. The thing cost about 150 million and it grossed about 200 million. So movie studios are notorious for fancy accounting. Who knows how much it netted? But on the official accounting, it was only modestly profitable. It's so beautiful that you think, oh, I want to see 10 more of these. Why didn't they make 10 more? And the answer was, it didn't make much money. It happens that in 2003, shortly after seeing that movie, I found myself seated at lunch with the man who then owned 20th Century Fox Studios, Rupert Murdoch. It was a largely Australian picture. Russell Crowe's an Australian actor. Peter Weir's an Australian director. Rupert Murdoch knew these people and liked them, and they were his friends, and he loved the movie, and he wanted it to be a big success. And he was disappointed that it just didn't seem to make enough money to produce the kind of commercial updraft to justify sequels. And he did say, it was amusing to me, he said, if I'd looked at the script beforehand, I might have suggested there's only that one moment when women appear, when they put in to restock supplies and islanders come canoeing out to bring them fresh water and bananas and so forth. And there's that one moment that lasts 30 seconds when Russell Crowe gazes at a beautiful Polynesian lady. And Rupert said, oh, if only they'd added a bit of a love story, they could have doubled the audience. They could have interested women as well. Anyways, the poor man was talking out of frustration. So the big question is, why didn't it get a bigger audience? Why didn't it make more money?
Let me jump in. So I actually have the opposite reaction to Peter.
Yes. As usual. Why am I not surprised?
The thing I liked about the movie was not the grand scenes, which I think are typical of, sort of seafaring shows, but I liked the creation of the boat, right? They clearly built one and they sailed it. And how small it was, to think that these people would go to sea for a year and live on these little boats. And I think the novels give you this flavor too, but this is why movies are superior in some ways to the written word, is you really don't get a sense of how small it was, how cramped the quarters were until you see it. The captain's quarters, which are the grandest ones, are, they wouldn't even be a hotel room in any American hotel now.
Not in Las Vegas, not the hotel room from which you are speaking right now, John.
Peter, let me again reacquaint you with my
surroundings. My goodness. Are you such a high roller that they gave you, Titus? You need to explain that John is showing us on his laptop the extent of his hotel suite.
That's the Praetorius Oakland Raiders stadium you can see there from the penthouse. Those black and silver bastards. So one thing was just how amazing the replica of the ship was and how small the spaces were. And you get a sense of how cramped it was, not just, first of all, I can't imagine how they lived below decks is amazing, but then how small the fighting ship itself was, with all the rigging, how cramped the quarters were. And then also the smallness. I thought the fighting scenes when the Surprise actually docks with the French ship, although in the novels, Peter, I don't know if you remember this, in the novels, it's an American ship that they go after. And in order to make the movie pleasing for the American, not the Australian audience, they switched in the movie the ship to becoming a French ship.
Yeah,
But
and
in-
so the
So,
USS
Master-
Oh yeah,
Norfolk
yeah. In the book,
becomes
it's an
the
American ship.
Acheron.
In Master and Commander, it's been a while since I read the book.
No, it's just, in fact, several of the books are about Jack Aubrey going to war with Americans. And in fact,
Yes.
I think one whole novel, he's a prisoner in
He's
Boston.
in Boston. Yes,
Exactly.
he's a prisoner in Boston.
During the
Right,
War of
right.
1812.
So-
That's right.
Yeah,
Yes,
so to
yes.
make this an acceptable movie, showing America's soft power and cultural dominance once again, even the British author has to convert the enemy from American into French, upon whom all right-thinking people can agree are the true enemies of civilization, the French. So the fight scenes also, what was also good was how cramped and tight the fighting was, because if you're on these
Yes.
tiny ships, you board the other ship and they're fighting with cutlasses and swords and daggers, and then these sort of unreloadable in that you don't have enough time to reload a pistol or a rifle. I can't think of a movie except maybe The Patriot with Mel Gibson, another Australian playing an American, where you get that sense of how primitive in tight quarters the fighting was back then. And then the second point about
Also, you can see the origin of the Marines, or what Marines were originally. They did not participate in sailing. Their job was to get to a high vantage point and shoot.
And there's some people think the real purpose of the Marines was to keep the sailors from mutiny, because life, as you can see on the ship, was so miserable. that
Miserable.
So that's one thing I thought after seeing the movie. The second thing is it's a great point you make about the lack of women, which is also different than the novels, because in the novels, women are a big part of the stories.
Right.
Remember, there's Maturin's wife, Dr. Maturin's wife is a spy of sorts, and is a very accomplished woman. And then Jack Aubrey's various love affairs is a big part of the books. He's always getting into trouble. And then the last thing I'd say is that I couldn't believe there wasn't a sequel made too. And I was hoping now that, we have all these streaming services which commit to these, multiple episodes, like the Bosch books we were talking about.
Yes, yes.
And you could recreate a lot of what must have cost a lot of money then to film this kind of show using CGI, using digital.
Yes, yes.
Now,
you could drive the price down of a lot of that stuff.
Yeah,
I
would think this would be a perfect opportunity for some streaming studio to make one of these series. Each book would be a great 2-hour episode.
I'm of the age where I draw a very sharp distinction in my mind between movies and television. My own children, very next generation, my own children draw no such sharp distinction. To them, a screen is a screen is a screen, right? But I thought to myself last night, it says something about the decline, not the commercial decline. Hollywood is richer than ever, but the decline of movies, that you get no sequel to Master and Commander, but the Marvel comic book series has now spun into what, 24 or close to 24 different movies. That doesn't speak well of the American Republic or cultural life.
No, Patrick O'Brien should have just had his books translated into comic books. Then he could have jumped to the movie.
He could have written graphic novels, more
That one is
pictures.
not a
per
bad
word.
idea.
But television, if they can drive the prices down, if they can use CGI, if you can use drones instead of helicopters, CGI instead of building 2 ships, if they can drive the price down, television is the place for this kind of thing to take place now, right?
Yeah, this is indeed the right time for big investments, and that's one way to cut the costs. If you're going to get an entire season out of paying a blockbuster budget, then that begins to be worthwhile.
That's one thing the movie, you just get a glimpse of what good friends the captain and the doctor are, but the whole 20 or 21 books or however many, where you really see how important that friendship is. You only see, touches of it. In the movie, it's really the action that's the star and not the relationships, I'd say. And so, that's the thing that's another thing that's lost in the 2-hour movie format, rather than suppose this were a 21 episode TV series, and that would become much more important.
I did feel as though Russell Crowe's character in the movie was pretty true to Jack Aubrey as he appears in the novels, and that Paul Bettany's Dr. Maturin was perfect.
He was good.
He got that just exactly right. He's half Irish and half Catalan. We learned in the movie that he calls himself Irish. He's actually comes from these 2 countries. Britain has run Ireland. Spain runs Catalonia. If you know this, he fits into European history. He's a permanent malcontent. His people have been oppressed for centuries on both sides. Is the way.
That's why Peter loves this guy.
Yeah. And he's skeptical, but at the same time, there is the kind of undercurrent. And it may well have been that they had to replace an American ship with a French ship, but you still get English, you still get the kind of common, it's not democracy exactly in England, but you do get an openness to the common figure, and Napoleon is still a tyrant. It's the Republic versus the Empire. It's Frodo versus the Eye of Sauron. All of that comes through, right?
I still don't get why Frodo gets to win. That always irritated me.
Yeah, Russell Crowe, not exactly Frodo, so there you may be going a bit far.
It's David versus Goliath. That's
But-
what.
But
That's
also
right.
since we're talking about the lawyer in movies, the other things I liked about it were how important the laws of war were, and
Yes.
rules and things like that. The fact that you could disguise yourself as a whaler and trick the enemy to approaching, and then just because you strike your colors and put up a different flag, you can suddenly start shooting.
Then you're
at
allowed
each
to
other.
slaughter them.
Right? Yeah, it was. Right nowadays, you're not allowed to do that. An American frigate can't disguise itself as a super tanker, get really close to a Soviet ship, and then, put up an American flag and just launch into the Russian ship anymore. But
So an
and
action off of Formosa would look very different in terms of international law.
Yes, so that's a part of it. But I wanted to talk about the Maturin thing just a second. The one thing in the movie, I think you don't see any sign of this, but it's in the books, is that in the books, Maturin is a spy for the British. And
right.
in
the intelligence operations you don't get.
Yeah, and I think in the movie, he's just made out to be this kind of doctor, and he's the ship's doctor, right? But he's not this, clandestine, which goes to your point about how he doesn't fit in anywhere, because he's a Catalan Irish, and so he's used to sort of sneaking in and out of places, right? Because he's such a misfit.
Right. This line got my attention because it takes place early in the movie, and I thought, oh, they'll come back to it and develop it. And then I thought, this is one of those things that was in the movie because they had a sequel in mind as they were writing the original script. The Frenchman appears out of the mist and gets off 2 volleys at the Surprise, the English ship, and before the English ship is able to disappear into the mist and protect itself, but the ship has been badly mauled. And Captain Aubrey, Russell Crowe, says to Paul Bettany, Dr. Maturin, we've sailed to the other side of the world and they knew exactly where we were. And Dr. Maturin says, well, they have their agents as we have ours. So there's this mention of the intelligence war, but it doesn't get developed. It never comes back. But I agree, in the novels, that's absolutely fascinating. Who's the character? Joseph Blaine. There's this kind of Q figure who lives in London, the spy master who lives in London. Yes.
Well, the other thing about Maturin, I thought that was, I think, a bigger deal in the movie. That's less of a deal in the book, is they make him out to be kind of a proto Thomas Jefferson who, can be a doctor and draw pictures of beetles and contribute to the Royal Society by, reporting new things I've discovered. And that was I thought, a wonderful part of the movie. That's not a big deal in the books. If I remember correctly, in the books, he's really into watches. See, Peter, another thing you have in common. He's into fine men's watches, because back then that was like part of being a learned person was, look how we make all the dials and things work together. I don't remember him, though, being like this kind of, Jeffersonian scientist or Ben Franklin like. That was a big part of the time that right in that time. This period, you were a naturalist, and anyone through self-education and study could contribute to the growth of understanding of nature. And you would find something like Audubon in America and then draw a picture, write it back, send it back to the Royal Academy or whoever back in London.
That feeling, I agree with what you're saying, of course. The naturalist thing may be overdone or overweighted in the movie. What comes through in the books, to me, again and again, is a feeling of newness. These ships are going places that people haven't mapped before. They're discovering species that no one has seen before. In the movie, it comes up where Captain Aubrey holds a ship's model of the enemy ship, and it's a new design. He's inventing tactics as he goes. You have the feeling that although to us that world seems very old, this is history, it was all settled and done and stayed. But Patrick O'Brian in these novels has this, you just get it again and again and again. It's the same sensation that I think we associate with space travel. Anything can happen. Everything is new. Tactics are new. Ship design is new. The things we'll see, the maps, the charts, they're constantly measuring things and taking soundings and finding out whether the crude map they have can be refined. That's a fascinating bit of the book as well. The depth with which Patrick O'Brian understood the period. He didn't just get the facts right, he got the spirit right. It was a big deal for England to beat Napoleon. and to emerge after that Cold War as the only superpower for a good long time.
100 years.
Yep.
Yeah. In the novels, especially, you get the sense that it's not really the Napoleonic wars, it's the wars of the British Empire dominating the oceans and the seas around the world. Ocean after ocean, sea after sea, they're expanding, and they're just getting better and better at being the naval world power. And I suppose, as you said, Peter, he started writing these, or Brian did, in the late 60s. They came out in Britain in the 70s, made a big deal in America only in the 90s, but Britain had lost everything. You could say that the naval warfare is sort of like James Bond. These are fantasies of empire once it's lost. And also a good recovery of what it meant, as you were saying. It's not just the Royal Navy, it's the Royal Society, right? It's the scientists, it's modernity, it's the first adventurous character of modernity, where you are discovering and conquering and achieving all sorts of things that nobody had done before, or nobody had done at that scale or with that precision. So you had this great combination of the jocks and the nerds, to speak of an American high school, right? And their friends. Which
I'm sure, I know this is only occurring to me now, but I'm sure one of the reasons I loved it so much last night when I watched it again, not a touch of wokeness anywhere. You get the feeling where this is what we've been talking about, that it's not a self-conscious, self-loathing empire yet. Everything is fresh. Everything is fresh. Morale is high. There's no self. Do you get Maturin a little bit skeptical about this or that aspect of warfare? But he never doubts that Napoleon has to be defeated and it's the English who should do it. Total self-confidence. You get this moment of adolescent high spirits through the whole thing. That's why John likes it.
Oh, of course.
John being a permanent schoolboy.
Now, I'm a little reluctant to give it an ideological label, but it does seem a conservative movie in that respect, that it's a movie about nationalism. The great speech in the movie is, right, Aubrey saying, this is our little piece of England, on the far side of the world, right? This is a declaration of national interest. We are here fighting because we love Great Britain. It's not because we are pledging our allegiance to the United Nations, right? Or even the anti-Napoleon alliance, right? You actually never hear about Prussia and Russia. And, this is our little piece of England. We're going to defend it like it's our home. Everyone on the ship is England. This is the kind of movie I was thinking is the opposite of these movies, are these kind of science fiction movies where all the nations of the world cooperate to get at the enemy alien, and all the different languages and nationalities are represented, in these alliances. No,
those horrible Star Wars scenes where you get these assemblies of legislators who some have 3 heads, some are pink, they all speak different language. It's the United Nations gone berserk in Star Wars. None of that in this, thank goodness.
In fact, I don't know if this is upper, because I'm also a big science fiction fan too. But everyone hated the prequel movies, which are characterized by this galactic republic. And the thing that everyone likes is this show called The Mandalorian, which is this new show streaming on Disney, which is about the disorder at the edges, right? The Wild West. That's what Americans like, right? The Clint Eastwood. Basically, it's Clint Eastwood in the Star Wars universe. You're not relying on the intergalactic empire republic for yourself.
That connection,
rely on yourself.
Yeah, it is.
The Mandalorian's voice even sounds like,
right?
Oh yeah, The Mandalorian is a great show because it is as if Clint Eastwood has been brought back and just given a blast, a blaster rather than a
Can you hear the Mandalorian's voice? Is Clint Eastwood's voice. He's very soft spoken. Do you feel lucky? Yeah. Well, do you? You're right. I hadn't thought of that, but it's Clint Eastwood.
Oh yeah. In fact, I think if you watch The Mandalorian, they actually have Western movie sort of little tunes and echoes in the soundtracks. And, you walk into the bar and you start shooting. Right. It's very similar. Right. Sergio Leone should be making royalties off that show.
Yes.
Exactly.
Good point. I hadn't spotted that. It's so embarrassing to see something. John
you're right.
Something out.
The Ennio
seems obvious.
Musical cues too.
Yeah, I'm a big I out pop culture you any day, Peter. Yeah, you went to your fancy Ivy League schools out there, and
you're going to start that?
The shock of it on Peter's face. It's too bad this is an audio broadcast.
Harvard and Yale is attacking Dartmouth? Are you kidding me? Unbelievable.
Well, it's always the privilege, denouncing privilege, isn't it, Peter?
Uh,
What did you? Uh,
John goes to Harvard undergrad, Yale's law school, and then just because he likes Philly cheesesteak, he thinks he's a common man. Unbelievable.
Oh, see, Peter, you didn't sit in on my. So Peter and I were together yesterday at the Hoover Institution because they run this boot camp for college students. So Peter, I saw him for lunch yesterday, but he didn't stick around for my class. Being from Philadelphia is the great equalizer that allows the elites and the common man to connect, because if you're from Philadelphia, you have been beaten down and oppressed for so long that I can relate to anybody.
What did you say to the kids?
I worked cheesesteaks and the Eagles and the Phillies into my class. Everyone understood. See, when you're the fan of a team that I think didn't win a World Series for 100 years, everyone sympathizes with you.
A century of rebuilding.
Yeah, well, it was never built. Rebuilding implies it was built in the first place.
Having established that we both love this movie, having established that we both read all the books, what would you recommend for somebody as a kind of follow-on?
I was going to say, Titus and I were talking about this a little bit. Have you ever heard of the Sharp series by Richard, I think his name is Cromwell, or?
The British Empire, and Sharp is a kind of Zelig of the British Empire.
No,
same time. Tries to be.
No.
Go ahead.
No, it's not.
Oh, really?
He's the same time period. It's almost as if someone took these books and put them on land. Bernard Cornwell, that's his name. And he writes about a guy who was a private, starts out as a private under Wellington in India. So there's the other interesting thing is you learn all about India and Lord Wellington before he was Lord Wellington and before the Napoleonic Wars. He starts out as a private and he makes it all the way up to, I think, now this guy is still around. He just paused writing these books. I think he becomes an officer, which was not allowed back then. Right? You had to be an aristocrat to become an officer, but he was such a good fighter and takes you all through the various Napoleonic campaigns, the Peninsula Campaign. But unlike this one, this is interesting, Peter, they did make this into a show. And so there is a BBC or ITV series about these Sharp books. And it's the show that made this guy, Sean Bean, the actor Sean Bean, a figure. So Sean Bean, since you like Lord of the Rings, Sean Bean is the guy in the first of the Lord of the Rings movie who is the son of the regent of Gondor.
Yeah, he plays Boromir.
But he's been in lots of great movies. He's a great actor. Yeah, he's a guy who dies at the end of the first movie. Yeah, Sean Bean's a great actor. He's often
yes. Okay,
yeah.
okay. I just looked him up.
He's often the bad guy in lots of movies too. But he's Sharp. And he's very much like Aubrey, reckless, daring. And I think, Titus, tell me wrong, I think both of these series, so a lot of people, I think, accused O'Brien not of plagiarism, but he would go to the Royal Navy archives and pull the reports of actual engagements. And that became where he got a lot of his ideas from. Nice. So a lot of these are actual sort of fictionalized real events. I think the same is true of Sharp. That if you go back and look at Sharp, they're real battles. Yeah, and he explains a lot about what it was like to fight back then. And he describes sieges and what would and sacking of cities and things that we don't know about anymore. But I think he took a lot of it from history. Also, I would say if you like this series, I think the Sharp series is the next natural thing to read.
I will look at that. On London Calling, another Ricochet podcast, James Dellingpole and Toby Young have been commenting on Cornwell has another series of books. Oh yeah,
it's like a medieval mythic Arthurian.
He has two. Stuff. He said there's an Arthurian series, I think, a trilogy. The guy writes like a maniac. He's so productive. And then also he's done books on Crécy and apparently the sort of early Renaissance
Years' War. Really? Wow.
Am I right?
I think so. He stopped writing the Sharp series to turn to these other books because I think these other books were much more successful.
Oh, really?
Yeah, people like fantasy a lot more than reality. Right? Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, it has magic in it and stuff.
But Cornwell and O'Brien figured out this great way to bring sort of dad and son interests together, all the war like interests and love and all the stuff that you love as a teenager, but also all the great technical stuff and the history that an American man starts to fall in love with in his 30s or 40s. It's a brilliant combination, and I think it's one of the reasons it has this generational pull. They haven't gone away.
So Peter knows this about me. I'm going to argue against my prejudices because Peter knows I'm prejudiced against aristocracy and monarchy. I can't stand that about Great Britain. Their slavish
You
reverence
protest too much.
for the royal
Oh,
family and their
please.
this whole architecture of aristocracy. That's why we all came to America, was to get away from these kind of societies. But here's what I'm going to argue against my prejudice is we don't have American equivalents to these. We have like Bosch. We have, who's his name? The author who, in fact, the Library of America just issued his books. He wrote the books that became like the movie Out of Sight and
Elmore Leonard, you're right.
Yeah, Elmore Leonard. Exactly.
Oh, Elmore Leonard.
Yeah.
That's
So we
spectacular.
have,
Yes, you Get
so we
Shorty
have-
is Elmore Leonard.
Yeah,
isn't
Get
it?
Shorty. So
Yes,
we have these
yes.
our series are kind of detective novels and police novels.
It's the hard-boiled
We
guy
don't-
on the street. We don't have the aristocrat.
Yeah, no, it's not even aristocrat. I was just wondering whether this aristocratic culture or monarchical culture supports this interest in military series, historical novels, which put the officer corps as the hero. I can't think of any American series that's kind of like that. TVs or right, like the American movies are like the one I was thinking of that's kind of like this, which also has Clint Eastwood, is something like Kelly's Heroes, where the officers are idiots and it's the smart enlisted men,
Yes,
or
yes.
Band of Brothers, where it's the enlisted men and maybe the lieutenant who's the hero. But the higher up commanders are usually seen as buffoons and out of touch,
Right.
except maybe Patton was a counterexample. But most of the other movies don't seem to glorify the office corps. You don't have these kind of logs. I don't know why. I just thinking while we've been talking,
Well-
I was saying, you said, what would you read next? I wanted to recommend an American book. I want to throw off the shackles of English thinking, but I can't think of one.
This is related to your comment. It's not the same point, but it's related to your comment. I happen to have a friend. I probably shouldn't name him because what did he ever do to get dragged into a conversation about the English aristocracy? But I happen to have a friend who's
either Rob Long or James Laglix. You can confess.
No. I happen to have a friend who is an earl. He sits in the House of Lords. He's a hereditary peer. And one of the big changes he tells me in the House of Lords, you recall that Tony Blair reformed the House of Lords, reducing to a small number the hereditary peers who sit there and increasing enormously the life peers. That is to say, the people who only get a title for their own lifetime and it does not pass down in their family. In his father's time, this is an old title. My friend is the more than 1,000th holder of this title. So it goes back more than 3 centuries.
Does he have a gigantic jaw and a lisp?
No, actually, he's highly intelligent, very successful, and he's a remarkable guy. But here's the point. Right through until the reform by Tony Blair in 1990 something or other, the House of Lords had a particular feel for and paid particular attention to the British armed forces because of the aristocratic tradition of serving in the armed forces. If you were a hereditary peer, the expectation was still very strong that when you were young, you would serve in the Navy or the Army. And the reform of Lords in 19 changed all of that. These people who come in with life peerages have spent their entire lives striving within one narrow profession. So you'll have a life peer who knows everything there is to know about some narrow field in finance, but nothing at all about the British military. So there was some kind of tradition. You're talking about the literary aspect, but it had a place in British public life as well. In Parliament itself, a kind of formal standing, the attention to the officer corps of the British military, which is now gone. So you can rejoice about that, John. That whack that Tony Blair took at the aristocratic system. But it did exist.
But they still have the monarchy.
Oh, John.
Well,
A hereditary
John
monarchy. How can people in this day and age subject themselves to the idea that they are to be ruled by a hereditary monarchy?
She doesn't rule anything.
She does.
It's the lottery of birth. They said, well, this is too dangerous to have people represent the nation. You'll end up with some lunatic dictator. So you just take it and say, well, let's make it a lottery. Whoever gets born into this job gets the job. And we'll all pretend as though we'll all defer to that person.
Unlike Alexander Hamilton, Peter really is a crypto monarchist. Poor Alexander Hamilton accused his whole life of being a crypto monarch, but he wasn't. Peter Robinson, crypto monarchist.
Oh, so the next book we're going to have to read, our friend and Hoover colleague Andrew Roberts has a new book out on George III.
Oh, really? Oh,
Although Andrew's a little suspect. Yeah, it will be interesting, won't it? We'll have to.
He's a fan of George III.
Oh, yes, he is.
Is he
also
really?
a fan of Napoleon, which makes his book on Napoleon was overwhelmingly pro-Napoleon, which gives me a little bit of a. I'm not
Well, he
telling you
wasn't
anything.
all bad. He wasn't all bad.
In Europe, Napoleon was the greatest figure of the entire 19th century, and by default, therefore, also of the 20th century.
He was just an early version of the European Union, Peter.
But
I
he
rest
was a
my
conqueror.
case. I rest my case.
As early as Stendhal, right, in Le Rouge et le Noir, Julien Sorel just wants to be Napoleon. That's his only ideal. What can a Frenchman aspire to? If you're a man of talent or you think you have an ambition, what could you really be? It's the only thing worth being. And it was that way for the rest of the century. And books about Napoleon accordingly still sell. Some kind of resurgence of aristocracy in revolutionary Europe. And unlike the aristocrats, he wasn't old and stodgy.
It's an amazing thing, isn't it, that the Swedish royal house still bears the last name Bernadotte. Ooh, Titus and I may have John on this one. You know what we're talking about.
He's the only one of the kingdoms of Bonaparte that hung on.
Oh, that's left.
Right.
Strangely
he was
enough.
one of Napoleon's field marshals.
Yep.
Who actually had a falling out with Napoleon. Napoleon didn't install him. The Swedes invited him to come be king.
Is the Dutch royal family still not the House of Orange? Did it not make it all the way?
They're still the House of Orange, but they weren't installed by Napoleon.
Oh no, they're
no, I'm not talking about Napoleon. I'm just thinking of royal families.
Oh no,
back to that time.
The oldest continuous family line is the Danish Monarchy, which goes back to somebody called something like Hagar Bluetooth or some. I mean, it goes. They can trace this thing all the way back. They can trace the thing all the way back to some Viking.
That's why they named Bluetooth, the technology. Yes, that's right. I remember reading that. That's right.
One tangent after another, but as long as we're talking about
these
the Danish,
emblems
I learned in Copenhagen.
Somehow this stuff still has a power to fascinate people.
It does. Who knows why? John will tell us why. I learned when I was in Copenhagen. Maybe this is a monarchy more to your liking, John. That the Queen, Queen Marguerite, most Mondays of each month has office hours. Anyone who wants to turn up can show up and go say hello to the Queen or bring a complaint to her. Isn't that remarkable? That apparently works. She shows up, there's an office, and people get in line and go in and have a word with her.
American presidents did that 200 years ago.
Yes,
just show up and bother Jefferson or Lincoln for that matter.
Well, that's how I feel like when students come to my office hours. I feel like a monarch saying, "What the hell are you doing here? I've got to go polish the silver."
Do you actually keep office hours, John?
Oh, you have to. Yeah,
you do. It's required.
Has to have,
and do students actually use them? Do students turn up?
Yeah, not every time, but sometimes. Yeah, they have interesting things to say.
Yeah, they do have interesting things to say.
Although this is interesting. This is a change of technology. Is they used to come a lot more before email became so prevalent. So now a lot of them will just email. If they don't understand something from class, they'll just email you a question. But, in the old days, you would if you didn't understand something, you would go to the professor in office hours and ask them. So that's changed. So you get less of that.
But as yet, there's no revolution against the aristocracy of tenure. The only American aristocracy.
Of course not. No, there's still some.
Yes.
There's still some bispherics and other sinecures that must be preserved.
Yes. Thank you, Titus. Thank you. The next time John attacks the aristocracy, I will say, yes. A tenured professor attacking members of the House of Lords.
Well, I just want everyone to make sure they know who's actually superior.
John's in favor of meritocracy because he's pretty sure he'll always come out on top. I have my doubts. Those of us who have less talent have their doubts about that sort of thing.
Oh, yeah, I'm totally on Jefferson's side on the aristocracy of talent. Yeah. How could you be for anything else? What is the justification for hereditary lineage being a representative of any kind of quality or ability or leading society in the right way?
That's the point. It's a pure lottery. It's the pure accident of birth. And if you look at the way members of Congress and members of the Senate in this country conduct themselves, you couldn't do any worse than filling one chamber on a lottery. It's the same impulse as Bill Buckley. I'd rather be ruled by the first 2,000 names in the Boston Telephone Book than by the faculty of Harvard University. That's roughly what it means to be ruled by an aristocracy.
So
Sort
I
of.
think that's a very
Sort of.
democratic argument for aristocracy, right?
Yes, exactly.
Equating birth with luck is a very democratic
Well,
idea, right? Birth means
so you
something
were
to
saying,
people who have a family name to inherit, then to everybody who is connected to them. You see that before modernity, people cared more about longevity. A regime is a good regime if it lasts a long time. And so all of them have a privilege because they have worked for a long time. That's what we used to call conservatism, after all.
Yes.
That's the argument for
I'll help
aristocracy. I
Peter.
would politely submit as a friendly stranger. No American should be making arguments for any kind of aristocracy, of course. I'm with John on this one, but as a friendly stranger, I will argue in favor of the old British regime, which is, gone. It's gone, so we can argue in favor of it, I would say, without any disloyalty.
That's true.
But
I will make the point that in America, Peter's prejudices in favor of the common man is actually very much a part of our self-governance. The power of life and death is held by the jury in our system, and that is right a lottery of 12 people.
Yes, it is
to represent the average of the community who get to hear complicated evidence and decide whether O.J. Simpson really did it or not.
John, have you ever been involved in
Bill
jury
Cosby.
selection?
Oh, I always get knocked out. The first thing they ask you is, do you know anybody in law enforcement? Do you know any judges? I'm like, oh, judges. Well, which courts? So they're like, get out of here. Just get the hell out of here. I sat in on a voir dire which is often not shown in movies because it's uninteresting. But usually when you have a criminal trial, you call 100 people to potentially serve on the jury. And then both sides, the prosecution defense, then ask them all questions to reduce it down to 12 people. So that's called voir dire. You're trying to detect bias. So you're trying to detect if someone biased for law enforcement. And so I actually made it to the 14th. Like I was in a group of 14 because this particular judge didn't ask about anyone's backgrounds first. Usually you fill out a questionnaire and then they knock me out right away when they find out I'm a law professor and who I know. This time the judge just went right to ask the lawyers, ask them questions about it. And you'll hear the funniest things not funny. They're amazing. Like a lawyer will say, have you ever had interactions with the police? And so this person will say, yes, I have. What do you think about the police? And this person will say, I think they are always lying. Right? So they're like, okay, you can leave now. Like things like that. People are so upfront with their prejudices in this.
Oh, they are.
Like they don't. They just
because they're honest. They're answering honestly about the way they think, or because they're shrewd enough to give answers that'll get them kicked out. Who wants to serve on the jury after all?
That's interesting. Then this is part of the theatrics of the trial. That is why it's such a good material for movies and TV. Is people when they're sitting in the little jury box or up on the witness stand and the judge is talking at them, and I think you can tell pretty well when someone's lying or not.
Oh, you can.
People get very nervous, even though there's nothing at stake. Even if it's just you, whether you serve on a jury or not, which is not the biggest stakes in the world, you can tell when people lie, I think, to get out of jury service. And the judges who've seen thousands of these people, they start asking them more questions. The judge sometimes will jump in and say, oh, you really think all the police are always lying? And they'll say, well, give me an example. And or he'll say, really, so if you had an altercation and someone tried to attack you, you call the police, you don't trust the police to be there. And they'll go on to make sure no one gets away with that.
Because the judge is the one who's supposed to make sure they go ahead and assemble a jury. His interest is in keeping the trial efficient, for want of a better word, for bringing it in on time and on budget, so to speak. Is that right?
Yeah, if you think about it, if it's easy to get out of jury service just by saying, I think all the police are liars, soon you won't have anyone to serve on the jury because everyone will say it. So the judges have an interest in making sure people are only dismissed from a jury for the right reasons and not just because they don't want to miss a few days off from work.
Right. And
so I've always wanted to be on a jury because I wanted to see, right? So here's another great example, right? How do we think jury deliberations in the closed room are like? We probably think it's like 12 Angry Men.
12 Angry Men.
Right? The greatest movie ever made. In fact, we show that to students in this course on cinema and the law. I've always wanted to actually see what it's like because I don't think it's like that at all. I'm very curious to see but I've never been able to get in. See, Peter, you can because your ignorance of the law is a sure ticket for you to get into a jury.
So, John, you can be an American meritocrat, but not one of 12 men good and true?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm actually not sure I trust juries anymore.
I know how to get myself out of jury selection instantly. I'll tell them I know you, John.
That's true. You get
out of here.
Ticket out of the jury every time. Or Rob Long.
or Rob Long.
It's a very interesting observation that there's some kind of fight between the comfortable desire to get out of the duty and, on the other hand, the solemnity of the moment that makes you fidgety about lying or, in some sense, breaking your word, even if the stakes are very low for jury selection. And it is true that people still select juries. Americans still do jury duty. The part of citizenship that goes against every
it's the closest many Americans will get to participation in self-government. You're basically, for that time period, you're an official of the government in a way. You are wielding the power of the state. Most people never do that again or never have to do it. They should welcome it. Most people don't want to serve on juries because it takes time. You miss out on jury, you miss out your days from work. Although maybe during the COVID lockdown, since the federal government's paying people not to work, maybe all those people should be required to do jury service for everyone else for the next 10 years.
That's a good idea. You see the Democratic impulse, John? One thing after another, John says, he could get elected to anything the way he talks.
But he chose the law. And America is safe.
Who, and this will stick the knife in me, Peter. I'm surprised you didn't do this. Who did Alexis de Tocqueville say were America's natural class of aristocracy?
Please don't tell me the lawyers.
Yes, the lawyers. He said, because there's no nobility in America, that function of an inherited aristocracy in society is played by lawyers and judges.
Even in a democracy, you have to select people who are clever about speaking, especially if there's the power of the law behind it. So
the worst thing about the Master and Commander movie, there was no JAG on the boat.
A notable absence of courts martial and whatnot, although in the first novel there is one. So yeah, that's
I just loath as I am to give John the last word. I, alas, have to return to the labors of the day here in Palo Alto, California, if you'll forgive me. What time is it? It's evening.
Peter's working, you're working on your book, right? Tell everybody about your book.
No. I'll work on the book when I finally got the book.
What book?
No.
Just say.
Peter's working on a great book. Yes.
Thank you. It's going to be a great book. It's going to be a great book.
But he doesn't want anyone to steal the idea for it yet, so he's not going to tell us what
it's a secret.
My theory is that God gives you a choice each day. You can either talk about a book or you can write it. And if I talk about it, I talk about it plenty. All right, enough of that.
Well said. All right, gentlemen, then I believe it's about time we should wrap up. This has been a vastly wide-ranging discussion from the Lincoln Lawyer to the Napoleonic War. Thank you very much for joining me. This was great fun. I was glad to just have the opportunity to read and to watch the movie again. These are indeed things we can recommend to everybody. The Patrick O'Brien, Aubrey-Maturin series, Cornwell series about the sharp novels, and of course the Hornblower series from 3 generations back, or 4 now, I guess. These are excellent for young men. I have recommended them to many young men of my acquaintance, and it's always been quite a success. So I think it's a tradition worth passing on, and perhaps 20th century will make new Aubrey-Maturin movies. They're saying, but we'll see whether it actually gets done. Cross our fingers, I guess. John, Peter, thanks a lot for joining me. Thanks for your time and for entertaining me at such great length. All the best.
A pleasure, Titus. John, I'll see you soon.
A lot of fun.
Get back to the craps tables right now.
Oh, I've stopped. I'm about even, so I don't want to.
Oh, you're about even? Stop there.
There's something in there. A lawyer who likes the unjust gains of gambling. There's something in there.
They're not unjust. What do you mean they're unjust?
They're
for
not
a few
earned.
dollars, I get to sit for hours and be entertained.
All right.
All right, boys. Titus, a pleasure.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye.